if I'm going to be really on for that rehearsal, that concert, I mentally have to be there. So really finding a way to, put aside the outside world or things going on in the other parts of your life, and really be there, focused. And I think that's probably the biggest thing to learn when you're in an orchestra.
I first met today's guest when I was finishing my master's degree. We met in Sapporo, Japan for the Pacific Music Festival, and he was such a fun person to work with and such an interesting artist. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting today with San Francisco Symphony Associate Principal Bass Steve Tramontozzi. And Steve does a lot outside of the symphony. Also, he teaches at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and he's always involved in some sort of solo project or chamber project. And he actually just released his latest album, Walkabout, which you can find. We got a link in the show notes, and you have to check this out for an epic photo of Steve with his bass. It's got all sorts of new pieces that Steve recorded for bass and piano. I heard some of them at a recital of his last year. Really great stuff. Steve and I chatted in person at Davies Symphony Hall in San Francisco, and we cover all sorts of topics. I know you're going to love this conversation. I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors, A440 Strings, D'Addario Strings, Robertson & Sons, and Upton Bass. You'll hear more from them later, but let's dig into this conversation with Steve Tramontozzi. So, weird place to start maybe, but I was looking at your bio on the website, and architecture was something you were into when you were young, right?
I was, yeah. I was in high school, and as soon as I got into the ninth grade, I wanted to take mechanical drawing, which is the fundamental, training that you get if you want to get into architecture and design. And so I did mechanical drawing, and I was really good at it. And then I at the end of that school year, you were asked to design a house. So I designed my own house and did all the working drawings. Wow. And so that was a great education. And so I don't know. I guess I was about 16, and I was thinking, well, I really like architecture, but here I am. I was into music ever since I was 8. My dad got us started on piano and then accordion of all things. But and then when it was when I had the opportunity in my grade school to pick up and learn a string instrument, I started studying the bass ever since I was about 11. But when I got to the age of 16, here I'm conflicted. I have these two disciplines, and I really had a strong feeling that I had to decide what I had to do with the rest of my life.
At that age.
Isn't that strange? Yeah, very strange. Not typical. But I couldn't decide. I really decided I needed to be quiet with myself and just, listen to my inner voice. And after some time, I think by early junior year in high school, I had decided, yep, you're going to be a musician. So that's what I did.
Wow. Are you still into architecture? Is that?
I mean, I really enjoy, observation, and I have many books on it. And when I go to a city, I like to observe and visit, unusual and unique buildings. And
well, I'm asked that because I'm totally into architecture too. I never thought I would be an architect, but I love it. And that's what I loved about living in Chicago and the architecture, and moving here to San Francisco and walking around and seeing, all the different styles. And you're from Boston.
Yeah, I'm from the greater Boston area.
Okay,
yeah.
which also has great architecture.
Yeah. Very old architecture, but no, also, I mean, I'm growing up in Boston. There was the unveiling of the new City Hall, and that just blew everybody out of the water because it was so modern, so cutting edge. But anyway, so yeah, Boston's filled with lots of different mixture of styles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Accordion.
Accordion, yeah.
Piano, accordion?
Piano, accordion, yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
What, was that sitting around the house, or how did that come into your life?
No, my dad played the accordion. He was growing up. He would go to the corner music store and he'd take lessons, and he became quite good at it. And he entered the service. And then when he was in the service in Europe, he in the evenings would go to the officers' club and entertain the servicemen. And so then when he came back from the service to Boston, he decided that he wanted to be a musician professionally, but he was advised against it since he was going to start a family, and so he got into banking. But he always played the accordion. He played gigs. He was a contractor, weddings, bar mitzvahs, you name it. And so he passed on his love for music, and particularly the accordion, to myself, my brother, and my sister as well. So
wow,
yeah.
You're not the only bassist I've talked to accordions in their life. I know that Larry Hurst.
No kidding.
Played accordion early, and I think, I might be remembering this wrong, but I think he was on TV playing the accordion real early in life. I have to go back and reacquaint myself with that story.
I got to ask him about that, yeah. Also, Dennis Tremblay.
Also Dennis?
Yeah,
really?
Dennis plays really well, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So bass at 11, and then you're studying with... remember the Boston Symphony, Robert Orleans?
Well, I first, my dad found this guy who played bass mostly in pickup, groups, and his name was Henry Karai, and he taught me for a year, every week, very organized lessons, and after 1 year he said, I think I've taught you everything I know, so you need to find a different teacher. And so my dad managed to find first a bass player who was going to the parish that he went to, and that was John Barwicki, and John was a member of the Boston Symphony, but when he spoke to John said, "No, I don't teach, but there's a guy who just joined the Boston Symphony, and he just moved into the town that you live in Arlington. So his name is Bob Olson."
Okay. Oh, Bob Olson.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I went to Bob's house every week. He lived a couple blocks from the high school, and got to use his bass. And he was a composer, and he went to the University in Minneapolis, and there he discovered bass and started learning to play the bass when he was in college, and played German bow, and got into the Minnesota Orchestra. But he wanted to play in the Philadelphia Orchestra, so he actually taught himself French bow, and took the audition and came in second. So
wow.
And then sometime later he auditioned for the Boston Symphony, got in there. But anyway, he was a really inspiring and motivating teacher for me.
Well, was he playing German bow primarily in Boston?
Yeah, just
okay.
German bow, yeah.
What was the distribution? Because I know Philadelphia had this reputation as being a French bow town. Was Boston mixed? Was it more of a German bow town? I mean, I think of people that are in it now, like Larry Wolf, the German bow player, but Ed Barker plays French bow.
Yeah, but and before that, Bill Ryan played German, and I think John and a couple other guys played German bow. So it was real mixed back then. Yeah. Okay. Henry Portnoy was the principal at the time, and he was playing French bow, and was one of the main teachers in Boston.
I've got this old book from Henry Portnoy. I can't remember what it's called. It's something like Creative Bass Technique or something. I was looking through it the other day, interesting. Just I love collecting books like that. Did you work with him at all in any capacity?
I didn't. I mean, I was a schoolmate of Ed Barker. He was a year older than I was, so and he studied with Henry. Okay. And from what Ed tells me, he was very organized and thoughtful teacher, and so. But no, I never got a chance to play for Henry at all.
You ended up for your bachelor's going to Eastman.
I did,
right, to study with the great Oscar Zimmerman, one of those bass legends.
Yeah, well, in fact, that's all I had known was that he was this renowned teacher, and I was graduating from high school, and I wanted to get out of town, you know. So I applied to a number of conservatories and got into a couple, but Eastman accepted me and gave me almost full scholarship, so I couldn't resist, and so spent 2 years there.
What was Oscar like as a teacher? I've heard a few stories, but how was he as a teacher?
Well, Oscar, you'd go into his studio, and it would reek of cigar smoke, and he'd have like the stub of a cigar in his lower lip, and he'd say, "Okay, just play this Cuneo, play through this Cuneo etude," and so you'd play through it, and he could solfege the whole thing with you, or play it on the piano with you. And they said, "Okay, now play this Bilet etude," and then you'd try to work your way through that, and then he'd accompany you. He says, "Okay, now play the first movement of this Baroque sonata," and then you do that, and then you'd work on a scale or an arpeggio, and he said, "Okay, now bring that back to me next week," and you'd do that. You'd try the best you could on it, and you'd come back and you'd play through all of that again. He says, "Okay, great, now play this Cuneo etude and this Bilet etude and the second movement of the sonata and the scale and arpeggio," and so that's how it was. You sank or swam. You just had to eat material.
If there's a story attached to the phrase "old school,"
that's it.
With the cigar in the mouth, especially.
Right. Yeah, in fact, when you came out of the lesson and you got into the elevator to go down to the bass room, people would remark, "Oh, you must have just had a lesson because you reek of cigar."
Just like today.
Yeah, right. Not. Yeah.
So 2 years there, and what happened next?
Well, I was there 2 years, and it went a fantastic school, a great facility, great opportunities to perform, and great concert halls and all that. I felt like that I was. It ultimately ended up not being the best match for me as a teacher. He might have been really great for me at some other point in my training, and so I decided to transfer, and I transferred to the New England Conservatory and was in Larry Wolf's studio.
Okay, so you got away from home, but then back close to home at least.
Yeah, but I got my own apartment.
Okay. Well, what a player, what a teacher, what a great guy. I talked to Larry for the podcast. It's been over a decade ago, I think, but still correspond a little bit. And how were those experiences? What were some favorite moments from working with Larry?
Well, when I was considering transferring, I had fortunately been able to attend a recital that he was going to play, and at the end, after the recital, I was just so moved and struck by his musicality and facility and everything. So I said to myself, I want to play like that. I want to sound like that. And so I ended up the summer before I started school in New England, I was able to take lessons with him, to kind of get up to speed or immersed in his world of music making. Yeah. So he's interesting because when I was studying with him, he was newer to teaching.
Sure.
And so he was finding his way to some degree, and his manner was to really want to communicate his understanding of something. So he would explain it to you, and then he'd explain it again in a different way, and then he'd explain it again in yet a third way, and maybe 4 or 5 different times, different ways he'd explain how to do something. And I finally would end up saying to him, "Larry, just play it for me." And he'd play it, and I go, "Oh yeah, I got it. I know what you mean." So he was inspired, very, incredibly beautiful. Always the music first, music first, and then everything you did, how you shifted, how you used the bow, always served the music. It was never, okay, learn these kinds of techniques and learn this etude, and it was, and that would be devoid of or unattached to music. He always wanted you to understand that if you're going to use the bow, you got to use it this way in order to be able to make the phrase work this way. So.
That record that he had, it influenced me so much. The one with Glier, there's this wonderful, I had it on LP. I remember listening to that over and over. And my teacher, Michael Hovnanian, studied with Larry. He went to New England Conservatory for a bit before he started to work professionally.
Right. Well, that record was, I think, influential with so many people. I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and mentioned that album. And in fact, I somehow lost that album over the years, and then recently I found it in a used record store. So now I have a new vinyl version of it. Yeah.
That's a keeper. I've got that, and I've got that Gary Carr famous Dragonetti one on LP. I've got like a very small handful of treasured bass LPs, and that's on there. I know you ended up playing in Brazil. Was that the next step for you after NEC, or where did life take you after you were working with Larry?
Yeah, after NEC, I managed to sort of work my way to some degree into the freelance world in Boston, and but still there was, there are many music schools there, many musicians trying to make a living there, and you hope to get a little piece of that, and you sit by the phone waiting for the call, and I did that for several months, but then I really wanted to get some full-time experience, in an orchestra, and so I actually answered an ad to audition for this orchestra in Brazil, in São Paulo, Brazil. It was São Paulo had a municipal or city orchestra, but they wanted to start. The government wanted to fund and establish this new orchestra, a state-funded orchestra, and they had hired Eleazar de Carvalho, the famous Brazilian conductor who actually made a name for himself internationally, to become the music director, and a Brazilian violinist who was had studied in New England Conservatory and then got a job in the Boston Symphony, and he was asked. Ayrton Pinto was his name, and he was asked to find musicians for this new orchestra. So he held auditions in both New York and Boston, and I played an audition, and I managed to get the principal job down there. And at that time that I went down there, about 15 of us Americans came to, and infused the orchestra with new blood, so to speak.
Wow. Had you been to South America or Brazil before?
No.
Okay.
But it was terrific for me because literally 3 weeks after I got down there, we had rehearsals, and we had rehearsed several programs for 3 weeks, and then the orchestra went on a tour of Brazil. So I was able to see Manaus and Belém and Fortaleza and São João and Rio de Janeiro, and basically see more of Brazil than most Brazilians. It was a fantastic experience.
Now, what a great way to launch off your time there.
Yeah.
I love meeting Brazilian musicians and bass players. I know several that have made their way to the United States, and one of these days I'll get down there. But what surprised you about the musical culture, the culture in general, relocating to Brazil? What was that like?
Well, I lived in São Paulo, and it was an incredible, huge metropolis, just bustling, and the orchestra was made up of many different international musicians from Argentina and France and Spain and elsewhere, and I think that tour actually helped everyone to sort of come together as a group, but because it was a state orchestra and it was state funded, I think that they had to the orchestra had to the management had to prove that, its existence somehow, or validate its existence. So they would have a theme for each season, and the theme for the first season was all the Schubert masses.
Oh, what a theme!
and at the same time, same season, all the piano concerti of Villa-Lobos. So who knew that he wrote piano concerti? But anyway, so
Wow.
but of course we did many other pieces by Beethoven and the standard rep and all that. But so that was, but it was, for me, it was really a great experience because I was playing principal, and I did have an American stand partner, but then everybody else was like from either Brazilian or Argentina, or there's one guy that was Italian, and so I had to sort of learn how to communicate with them all, and sort of massage everybody's position. Yeah.
Were rehearsals in Portuguese or in English, or
They were in English. Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
that made that part of the I mean, I know we all speak the musical language, but it's still nice to know.
Yeah.
Bar 28.
Well, unfortunately, it was in English because I feel like I would have learned a lot more Portuguese if I had to, be completely immersed in the culture and the language.
And how long were you down there?
I was only there one season, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
So I could have stayed longer, and then in fact there were musicians that came down when I did that aren't still there. So but I decided after a season that I really wanted to. Try breaking into the orchestral scene in the United States. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I came back.
And where'd you come back to?
Well, I could have gone back to Boston because I knew I knew Boston, and I knew what it was like there, and I would have felt some comfort there. But at the same time, I knew that it would be like starting over, in the freelance world. So I ended up. Moving to California, and my first stop was San Jose because, I got married before I went down to Brazil, and my wife at the time had her family in San Jose, so we were able to sort of relocate here more easily, right? But it was tough being here because this was back in 1978, and the San Francisco Bay Area was much more provincial than it is now. It's incredibly, cosmopolitan and international even. But back then, it was very, very hard to break in. You had to be a student of a teacher. You had to be, recommended very seriously by an established musician. So I actually worked for about a year pushing paper at Intel Corporation. Just trying to pay the bills. So
wow.
Yeah.
And hoping, planning, work at breaking into the scene.
Right.
And one of those teachers, I'm assuming at the time that had that sort of pull, Charles Ciani.
Right.
Was he principal of the San Francisco Symphony at the time?
No, he was never principal. He was always second chair.
He was second chair, okay.
And he was also second chair in the opera.
This is before the two split.
Exactly.
Okay.
The two orchestras were able to, the two organizations were able to split in 1980 when Davies Hall was built. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, both organizations had to share the Opera House as their performance venue, along with the ballet, San Francisco Ballet. So I actually auditioned for the conservatory for my master's, thinking that maybe I could improve myself and get to know Charles Ciani, who was the teacher there. He was the teacher there, and then he was also the teacher at San Jose State. Not San Jose State, San Francisco State.
Sure.
So he was pretty much the only teacher in the area. And I played an audition for him, and it went really well, and he accepted me right away. And then the very next day, I got a call to sub with the San Francisco Symphony, so I sort of knew that's how it worked. So, and then got some work with the opera as well, because by that time, he had become principal of the opera, and so he recommended me for that. So I will be grateful for that. And, then what happened after that? There was an audition for the San Francisco Symphony in December of 1979, and I had been practicing, and I took the audition, and I did not make the finals because I obviously didn't play well enough, but I was told that I got a split vote, so I was encouraged. So then there was another audition, in May of 1980, and then I won the audition at that time for the section. Yeah.
And that was right before Davies Hall opened up. So
Right.
you started your time with San Francisco still in the opera?
Well, officially I started in the fall, September, in Davies Hall, but I was hired, after winning the audition, I was hired to sub with the symphony in June for the Beethoven Festival, which they held at the Opera House.
Okay.
And the guest conductor for that three-week period was Michael Tilson Thomas.
Oh,
In fact,
get out of here, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was fun. So, who I knew of and had seen a lot in Boston when he was a principal guest conductor there when I was growing up. So,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so-
Okay, you could spend quite a bit of your career in musical time.
Right,
Yeah. It's a small world.
right.
Whenever anybody's going to the Midwest, and I lived in Chicago, Illinois for years and years, I tell them to go to A440. If they're looking for a bow, if they're looking for a bass, if they need some repairs, then if they have a student who's looking for an instrument, A440 has been serving the community for years and years. They're located just west of Wrigley Field in beautiful Chicago. They do great work, and they've been a big supporter of bass events over the years, whether it's the Chicago Bass Festival or really any bass event. A440, you guys rock. Check them out at a440violinshop.com.
I'm Jory Herman, and I'm one of the newest members of the Los Angeles Philharmonic double bass section. Last year I began using the Diodario Kaplan strings and really love how they sound and what they can do. As a young bassist, my first memories of playing the instrument were actually on the Diodario Helicore strings, so you could say that I've been using Diodario products since about 1994. Throughout college and my early professional life, I tried many different types and gauges of strings, and even experimented with mixing and matching from different sets. I would put 3 strings from one set with the lowest string from another, or maybe just change out the top string or do half and half, but never was really fully committed to the entire set from a single brand. Kaplan strings, however, do everything that you need them to. They have a crisp articulation while remaining warm and resonant from top to bottom across all strings. They have an immediate and clear response without maxing out in the loudest section of the music, all while still being delicate and singing in the softest sections of the music. All around, they're an incredible set of strings for the orchestra bass section.
So when I moved to San Francisco, talking with some people here, they said, "Oh, you've got to learn more about Charles Ciani," and he's this teacher, this bit player that had a huge influence in San Francisco in the bass world. And I talked to Shinji Ashima when I moved here for the podcast. I know that
Sure.
he had some stories. I don't know if you have any stories or memories, either of him as a teacher or in the orchestra or outside. Anything?
Well, when I took the audition and won for the conservatory, right after that, he goes, "Well, why do you want to come to school here?" And I said, "Well, because I want to get my master's degree." And he said, "Why here, not back in Boston, where you're from?" And I go, "Well, because I live here now." And then he said, "Okay, well, I don't take any bullshit from my lessons." Can we say bullshit?
You absolutely can.
And I said, "Well, I don't give any." And he said, "Great. Okay." So then that was my introduction to Charles Ciani. But I have to say, he was the best person for me to quote unquote study with at that time, because I pretty much could play pretty well, but he had these incredible ears, and he would say, but my lessons basically consisted of, I'll come in, I'll play a piece, and I'll go, "Oh, that note is out of tune. Oh, that rhythm's not quite right." He'd point out that dynamic or whatever it was, and it would really, put me on edge, like really get to me that it wasn't perfect, So I said, okay, next time I play this, I'm going to play this perfectly for him. And so it really helped me to listen to myself and to be self-critical. Mm-hmm. And that's what he taught me. And I'm grateful to him for that. So
either in terms of the symphony, with a lot of directions we could go, but even if we think about the orchestra, like how have things developed over the years? What are some of your favorite experiences from your time here? Any favorite moments or takeaways, tours, concerts? another big question.
Right. Well, back in when I first got in the orchestra, that was when both the symphony and the opera could. The musicians that played for the opera also played for the symphony, and so at some point, when the two organizations split, each musician had to choose which organization they were going to go with, and so that created a lot of openings at that time in both orchestras. And so when I got into the orchestra, so many new people got in those early 80s years. And Edo de Waard was the music director, and he was really instrumental in picking all this new talent. And so the average age of the orchestra in San Francisco was really quite young, and it was all this youthful energy and enthusiasm, and the concerts were really, really exciting. And then we were able to, for the first time in the orchestra, prior to me, my getting the orchestra hadn't toured for several years. And but now with this, new energy, the orchestra decided to do some travel. So we traveled for the first time in years across country, did a big national tour, and then European tours. And then when Edo de Waard had decided to step down, and Herbert Blomstedt became the music director, that was a whole nother sort of era that was ushered in, because he was billed as, the maestro.
Okay,
so,
sure.
Yeah. And in contrast to Edo. So in that, he was an older, established, European versus.
Right.
So anyway, the orchestra then really. The level of the performances was so consistent with Blomstedt. I mean, he was so demanding and would work everything out in rehearsals, and then in the concerts, you knew exactly what he was going to do, for better or for worse, but usually mostly for better.
Okay.
And the performances were, consistently high level, to the point where, it attracted recording contracts. And so we were recording tons, Sibelius symphonies, Nielsen symphonies, Brahms, Beethoven, and all kinds of, standard rep with him. And then taking that rep on tour. Bruckner, in fact.
Yeah.
So, and got the notice of the cultural world in Europe. And in fact, George Schulte was at one of our concerts in, I think, Salzburg, and he heard us doing Bruckner 5, and he wrote a note to Blomstedt saying, you and the orchestra are wonderful, and that opened the door for him to actually then be invited to guest conduct us. So yeah.
Schulte.
Yeah, that was a big event. Yeah,
I'll bet.
Yeah.
Had you worked with Schulte before that?
No, in fact, he, I think, did not guest conduct much in the United States when he was music director in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Maybe that was part of his contract, but would only guest conduct in Europe and opera and what have you. And so this was, I think, he was able to guest conduct us because he had recently resigned from Chicago.
Mm-hmm. I have a memory of playing in the Civic Orchestra of Chicago with Schulte doing an open rehearsal as Bruckner's Symphony No. 0. And this was not a union orchestra, a civic orchestra. He could basically do whatever he wanted. And something was going on in the violins that he didn't approve of. And he said, "What's going on there?" And he got off the podium and started walking into the violins. And you just saw the terror in these 18, 20-year-old faces.
Right. Well, I don't know if I should say this story, but when he was conducting, he was working with the trumpets. I think we were doing Petrushka, mm-hmm. And he just kept going over and over the same spot. So I, just as a kind of nervous habit, I took up my cloth and I started wiping my bass down, getting the dusty rosin off of the top of it. And he turns to me and he goes, "Do you want me to get you a Hoover?" Anyway, that is. Well, I remember Steve Lester, the Chicago Symphony, has some particularly great Schulte. It seems like something always
what happened to Steve when he would cut. So his extension popped open in the middle of rehearsal, and Schulte said, "Turn off the kitchen." And then I guess it was raining really hard one day, and Steve was late to rehearsal. He wouldn't mind me sharing this. And he comes in, and Schulte just turns and says, "What will you do when it snows?" so
Yes.
Well, what was Blumstedt like as a music director? I never worked with him, but obviously big name. What was he like?
Oh, he's a very elegant and formal person, and was very respectful of everyone. And he even addressed you by Mr. or Mrs. or Miss so and so in the orchestra. And when he came to rehearsal, he was like all business. He was so well prepared, and knew exactly what he wanted. He worked well. He got what he wanted, and but he did. He showed his appreciation too. So, again, he was always. He had a very complete concept of the music, and worked to get that. And once he got that, and he had all his motions all clear and worked out. And then when it came time for the concert, and so for the last rehearsal, he would always call it the Generalprobe, which is the dress rehearsal. And he would always play through the whole program. And then go back and do any spots if necessary. And then you really felt like prepared. And then when you played the concert, you understood everything that he was doing, and the orchestra played really well because of it. Yeah. So.
Wow, interesting. He'd go through the whole program before making any. That's
for the last rehearsal. Yeah.
Unusual, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an older mode of working. Where you rehearse, and then the dress rehearsal, you just run through it and work on details if necessary after that. But
Well, and when did he leave? When was his last season with San Francisco Symphony?
I think he left at the end of the 94-95 season.
Okay.
So he was there 10 years. Yeah.
And is that was there a period of time before MTT came in? I can't remember.
No, MTT. The search. I think Blumstedt made his resignation known in advance enough time for the board to look around for a successor, and then Michael Tilson Thomas's hiring was announced before the end of that the 95 season, and then Michael started in the fall of 95.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I got the chance to sub with you guys recently, and I'm always interested in what an orchestra like the San Francisco Symphony, in terms of guest conductors. You get a lot of guest conductors. You get people coming in and working with you. What makes for a good guest conductor? Could be with any orchestra, but with the San Francisco Symphony. Like what are some of the characteristics of a good guest conductor?
I suppose this can vary from orchestra to orchestra,
Sure.
but I think you have to be a really good communicator. I mean, it's a challenge to be the guest conductor coming in and having to communicate with over 100 people, because everyone is different. But if you can really be clear about your concepts of what you want, then if you can communicate that well, then people will buy into what you're telling them. So if the conductor shows some sort of vacillation or some indecision, or he's not clear about what he wants, then he's lost the orchestra. But if he has a strong idea of what he wants and is able to communicate that, of course, my responsibility as a member of the orchestra is to sort of buy into what that is. Each person is going to be different. Each conductor is going to be different, and so maybe this time doing Brahms 2 will be different than 2 years ago with another guest conductor. But that's okay, because I don't want to ever do things exactly the same, right? So he has to be a really great communicator, and then he has to understand what he has in the orchestra. Say, for instance, like he there's an orchestral solo, like a clarinet solo or whatever. He has to, take it in and understand, like that person's contribution to that solo, and then say, okay, that's great. Now I want you to maybe, change a little of this or a little of that, but really be sensitive to the personality and the contribution of the musicians in the orchestra. I also think that conductor has to work efficiently. Which will mean that because you're only with them for 4 rehearsals for that week's program, you want to feel ready. You want to feel like it's going to be a good performance. So he has to talk less and conduct more. In other words, you can talk and talk and talk, but that doesn't actually sink in very much unless you get a chance to try it, to play it, to get his feedback on it too. If he's asking for something and you think you're doing it, we don't know if it's not clear sometimes if he thinks it's perfect or if he thinks it should be different or it's not quite there yet or whatever. So you have to work efficiently. What else about a good... he has to be respectful and also not bring to work, something that's not going right at home.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Leave it at home, kind of thing. So.
It can be hard to do.
Right. Yeah.
What's something? I've talked to several people with full-time orchestra jobs about this, and some people have talked about how surprising it was to them all of a sudden being in an orchestra and the 8 service a week and the lifestyle and that sort of thing. Now you were a principal in Sao Paulo in the orchestra too, so this wasn't your first time doing this, but maybe if somebody joined the San Francisco Symphony their first season, what might be surprising to them about it? Someone with no orchestral experience, now here they are in the San Francisco Symphony, about the lifestyle, about the work schedule, about what...
a musician.
Yeah, a musician.
Just joined the orchestra. Yeah.
What would they find most surprising about, or unexpected about what it's really like being in an orchestra?
Well, how well prepared you have to be on the material, because you only have the 3-4 rehearsals, and when you come to rehearsal and you're working, you realize how quickly you have to get up to speed on stuff. Like if the conductor wants it differently, or asking for a different kind of stroke or different tempi that you're not used to, you have to get it really quickly. And I think that fundamentally, our experience in orchestra, working in an orchestra, is this: that you are there for a performance, say a 2-hour performance, or you're there for a 2.5-hour rehearsal. You need to be at that 98, 99, 100%, focused on level. You need to be on for that. You need to be at performance level for that, for those few hours that you're on stage. It's like being on a sports team, or any other performance art. You have to really, and so you have to be in shape. You have to, physically be in pretty good shape. You have to understand that if I'm going to be really on for that rehearsal, that concert, I mentally have to be there. So really finding a way to, put aside the outside world or things going on in the other parts of your life, and really be there, focused. And I think that's probably the biggest thing to learn when you're in an orchestra.
This episode is brought to you by Robertson and Sons Violins. For more than 40 years, over 4 decades, Robertson and Sons has specialized in providing the highest quality stringed instruments and bows to collectors, professional musicians, music educators, and students of all ages. Their modern facility, which is totally beautiful, by the way, if you're ever able to make it out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I highly recommend it. They have a recital hall that they use not only for performances, but it's available to their clients. So if you want to try out a fine pedigree bass or even a student bass or anything in between, you can go in that recital hall. I've had the chance to do that. Totally amazing. I'm like a kid in a candy store when I'm down there at Robertson's. Check them out online at robertsonsviolins.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Upton Bass. And have you checked out this new travel bass from Upton? Oh my goodness, what a cool looking design. What a great sounding bass. It's just totally remarkable. And the way that they're launching this product, it's just so perfectly Upton. It's bold, it's innovative. You got to check out these videos of Gary Upton unfolding, I don't even know how you describe it, putting together, I guess, this travel bass. It takes almost no time. It is in a Samsonite piece of luggage. I kid you not. It is just a suitcase. It is literally a suitcase bass, but it comes together and it's a real bass. It's a nice sounding bass. So cool. Just another example of the way in which Upton is innovating and blazing new trails for the bass community. So thank you for what you do, Upton, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast.
Yeah. Well, what do you? And I find that totally fascinating to think about that. How do you be on in those couple hours? I remember talking to Kate Nettleman, who's associate principal bass of Minnesota Orchestra right now, about that, and she's like, people don't understand. It's that, you think, oh, I'm only doing this for 2.5 hours a day or 2 hours a day if it's a performance or something, but like the focus required and to get yourself in that state, and both physically and mentally, like what do you do to ensure that you're in that kind of a state? Anything from working out to like regular practice to like how do you get yourself to where you can be in that 98, 99, percent?
Yeah. Well, I think practicing is fundamental, really, but even more so is being in shape. And what I'm fortunate because I've been teaching ever since I can remember, but I teach at the Conservatory of Music here in San Francisco since 1985, and I also have taught at Stanford and the University of California, Berkeley and Santa Cruz, and at Mills College, and teaching for me is incredibly valuable. I get so much from it, and I don't just mean all that I learn from students, like their perspective or their new ideas, but I learn that I have to examine myself continually, examine how I am doing this, how am I playing, physically and technically, because I have to then communicate that to them. And if I don't examine how I'm doing it and keeping track of it and toning it up and adjusting, then I'm not able to help them. So that's the benefit that I have. So I feel like I stay in shape in large part because I'm a teacher. I think that, say if you're playing a particularly difficult piece, practicing that piece and checking your mental thought processes while you're practicing will really help you be prepared when you play it in the orchestra, because then you can recall, clicking into those mental signposts and bring that to your playing when you have to play something difficult on stage.
Yeah. I like that concept.
Yeah.
And the teaching, it's amazing. I had a bunch of years where I was teaching high school. I was a high school orchestra director, but I was also teaching at DePaul, and just having to be there for the students, and really bring that. I think that I would have declined much more as a bass player if I hadn't had that time with those private students at DePaul, because it really made me think about bass playing and the physicality of it and the ergonomics of it. And I learned so much, both from the students, I had some great students I taught, but also just from the process, that self-examination.
Yep.
So you had teacher, you got the old school Oscar Zimmerman with the cigar and the play it again, and then you know, there's no bullshit. Charles Siani. With your own teaching, like what? And this is again, sorry for the super wide questions, but someone starting their undergrad at San Francisco Conservatory, what do you? And I know it's specific student to student, but what do you like to work on with students? That could be technical exercises, that could be repertoire. Like what are some of the things that you pull out and work on with students typically?
Well, I tried to take in who they are. Mm-hmm. And when I first get to hear them play, I find I listen to, you know, what music is coming out. Are there glimpses of music making here? And then I evaluate, okay, they're able to sing in the middle register, you know, but they have trouble in the high register or lowest register. So then I know, well, I'm going to have to attend to the tool that will help them sing in the high register, you know, like, so we'll work on vibrato in that case. I'm being actually more specific to you, but just to say that, you know, I'll learn, okay, well, you know, they're making a lot of false accents, and so why is that? Is it their left hand? Is it their right hand? Oh, if it's their left hand, then are they shifting, you know, too fast, too slow, not shifting, you know, accurately, or whatever the issue is, and then I will work on various exercises. I'll give them concepts of the shifting and give them exercises that I've produced myself, organized. Again, I just to go back to my the influence of Larry, and that is start with the music. Start, you know, and see, you know, what tools do they have, and are those tools serving the music? And if they don't have enough of tools, then you pick materials that will help them develop those tools. I'm not a big fan of doing lots of etudes, but I will choose some etudes that will address the issues for that particular student, you know. And I'm also careful about grading the level of repertoire, so I want to make sure that they are not sort of overwhelmed with a particularly difficult piece for their level. So I'll, you know, choose an appropriate piece for their level, but something that is challenging, you know, for them.
Larry Hurst has a line that he used. I love it. He said that your average student, or at least at Indiana, would walk in 2 years behind in their bow arm, then their left arm.
No kidding. Yeah.
You found that to be the case?
Yeah. I mean, almost anybody can sort of figure out how to digitize, you know, with their left hand. You know, they figure out like how to organize their left hand. But it's it's the bow. That's where the voice is. That's where, you know, so much of our expression comes from. Is, you know. I mean, it is the voice, you know, and I feel like, you know, if you don't warm up, for instance, I always warm up my bow arm, my sound first, because if that's not warmed up, it doesn't matter how fast or how, you know, facile I can be in my left hand, it's just going to sound like crap, right, you know, if my bow is not happening. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. How do you warm up your bow? Do you have a routine? Do you have some exercises you like to do personally?
It kind of, you know, changes over time. Over my career, where you know, I probably need to do more of this at one point in my life, or do less of this, and I try to warm up the bow in long tones first, but not a lot of long tones, but and I'll do a lot of you know, portamento slides, octave, you know, fifths, octaves or more, to get and because I want to actually start to feel how much I can open the sound up. So others, I'm going to increasingly get closer to the bridge to find out, you know, how, you know, I want to have a range of expression on the bass for that day. And so I want to be able to play incredibly soft or velvety or whatever. And then I want to be able to have this incredibly intense focus sound and anything in between. So I'll work on that. I'll do, 5-note patterns, scale patterns. I'll do scale patterns, all, 1, sometimes 2 octave scale patterns. Other words, I think it's important to start with the long sounds first. And then once I'm done with the long sounds, then I'll work on détaché, which is the next stroke on the on the pyramid.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
So and the détaché. So I'll do everything. If I do a 5-note pattern or scale or whatever, I'll do them détaché. And understanding that, of course, if I'm playing a détaché stroke with my left hand requires coordination. Of course, it always requires, but a certain kind of coordination, right? Your left hand has to press or move first, and then your bow plays, right? So I work on that, and I might do that slower, but then I understand that if I'm going to go faster, I'm going to end up using less bow. So I actually play I'll practice at a slower tempo, shorter strokes that I will use or need at a faster tempo. So I'll do those scales, slowly, shorter, and then speed it up until I can feel like I can play anything détaché. And then if I'm going to, like, if in front of me I have something that, like Mozart or something that requires sautiller or spiccato, then I'll warm that up. And that requires at first, the sort of rhythm machine, as Edgar Meyer says. Get the bow moving rhythmically, perfectly in whatever stroke you're playing, sautiller or spiccato, and then you can apply your left hand to it. Right. So I kind of do it in that order because that it gets more sophisticated as you go along. Right. So.
Yeah, from biggest motion to shortest or highest velocity. Yeah.
Right.
Well, so I got to ask, because I know a lot of people I talk to pretty much everywhere I've ever spoken to with a professional orchestra job that is inspired about music and life and what they're doing. They do something outside of the orchestra, and obviously you teach, but then you also are active. You're playing chamber music, playing solo music. I just saw a recital of yours at the conservatory maybe a little over a year ago, like April 2017.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you recharge your batteries and stay creatively active outside of the orchestra?
Well, I think it's important to do other musical activity outside of the orchestra, because that's how you grow more. My interest is in performing at least one recital a year, or something, 2 if I'm lucky, but or crazy. But I think it's that you become entirely responsible for what's happening in the music at every given moment when you are playing on a solo recital. So you have to really make all the musical decisions. And if you're playing with a pianist or any other musician, you have to partner. And you end up really opening your ears because you have to hear the whole music, the piano part as well as your part, and understand how that works and together. So I like to. I'm at the point now where I want to perform music that interests me. So I've done plenty of Bottesini and the old standard bass pieces, but I'm at the point where, for instance, I would travel with the orchestra to Europe in particular, and there, whatever musical capital we were in, Amsterdam or London and Paris and elsewhere, I would visit any music store that was in that town, looking, Vienna, for instance, Dublin, and I would just rifle through all the bass rep and even some of the cello stuff, and I would buy all that I could, and I would bring it home and I would add to my collection. And I'm at the point now where I go and look through my collection. I go, okay, well, here's an interesting piece, and so I'll play through it and say, "Yep, that's worth working on," or "No, that is, it's maybe some other time." But so I want to bring. There's so much music out there. People think that there's nothing for the bass to play, but there is so much material. I have shelves and shelves of music. So I'm learning this music and trying to perform it in recital. And the next step would be to record some of the more interesting things, in which I have started to do.
Wonderful, yeah. So I remember we were chatting about that a few weeks ago. And do you? So you have begun recording? Okay.
Yes, I've done enough material for a full CD.
Okay.
So I just did that the past year. This past December and October, and did all the recording sessions and did all the editing, and then we did all the sound mixing, and
so it's ready to go.
It's all ready to go. I just have to sort of get it packed up. And
what you mind sharing what we're going to hear? Or you want to? Okay.
Well, okay. So part of what like I said, is part of my interest is the music that's already been published and written, and but another part of my musical mission is to encourage composers to write music for the double bass and other instruments. And so I asked David Conte, who's a composer at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music on faculty there and elsewhere, and to write something. And he came up with this incredibly beautiful sonata for bass and piano that he writes in a very contemporary, romantic style, and which is just right up my alley because I love to sing on the bass. And so he wrote this terrific sonata, and so that I recorded that. Mm-hmm. That's a world premiere recording. Nice. It was a world premiere performance, and then I asked David Garner, who is also on the faculty at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, to write me a trio, and we threw around a few ideas about, bass and what, and what. Right. And so I finally, he ran out of ideas. And so I suggested, how about oboe or English horn and clarinet or bass clarinet? And he goes, okay, I'm going to write a trio for 5 instruments. So he wrote this piece for bass, oboe doubling English horn, and clarinet doubling on bass clarinet.
Oh.
And it's really, really a fun piece. So I performed that. I haven't recorded that one yet, but soon.
Okay,
it'll be soon.
Nice.
Yeah. And then the world famous jazz pianist Jeff Keezer,
sure, yeah,
wrote a piece for himself and Sue Wolf in San Diego. And they had performed it a couple of times, and I'd heard that their performance here in San Francisco, and so I asked him if I could perform that piece, and he said, sure. And so then I dug it so much, I said, hey, can I record it? And so he said, sure, and that's one of the pieces that I recorded as well. And then I tried to dig up, like I said, things that have never been done, or I think have never been done, or haven't been done much. Mm-hmm. And so I found that piece by Arthur Honegger.
Sure, and the train. He wrote the Pacific.
That piece.
Yeah.
But he wrote a piece for an instrument called subas. It was invented by Leo Sir, and it was an instrument that is it's somewhat between the size of a cello and the normal orchestral bass. And I believe that the tuning was such that it was like a big violin, like the lowest note was the low G, like a minor third above the open E, and tuned in fifths. And so he wrote this piece called Prelude, and I've always loved Honegger's music. I think I read his biography, in fact. So because I find him to be each piece seems to be uniquely different and interesting. So anyway, I played that piece. It's with piano. Recorded that, and then there's a piece, Moderato, that Shostakovich wrote and was discovered long after he passed in the 80s in his notebooks, and it was apparently written at the time of his first cello sonata. but it was never published, and it was only discovered recently, and it has been recorded a few times by a cellist and piano. And I decided, well, this would be a great thing to do, bring this piece to the public, on the bass. So I transcribed it for bass. And so I'm doing that piece as well. I love that piece by Joseph Jongen called Prelude, Habanera, and Allegro. And it's been recorded a few times. But I just love that piece. So because it's like the bass player's Ravel, so
cool.
So that's another piece I've done. And what's left? A piece I wrote. So
really,
yeah. I wrote this piece in a fit. In that I was sort of listening to a lot of Edgar Varese music, and was because I enjoy composing, and I find that Varese's music is very different than anybody else's, and seems to have sort of come out of nowhere. So I, after listening and digesting his music, I decided to write a piece for solo bass. So, and knowing that he did write a piece for solo flute, and so I thought, well, I could use some of his musical aesthetics, like the extremes of expression and dynamics and complicated rhythmical figurations, and apply it to just one instrument. So, yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to check that out.
And that's called Homage to Varese. Yeah,
okay.
So,
okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
the first CD. So
and more to come, hopefully, with a shelf like that of undiscovered music.
Yeah.
Where did you record all this? At the conservatory in that hall, or
I was able to record it in the recital hall.
Okay.
Yeah. They have a first class recording facility there.
And that's a great acoustic for bass.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. You're on stage and you play and you go, wow, I really feel supported there. Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to check it out. Certainly, everybody listening, needs to check that out. And I love that I love that you compose to it. Is that a regular thing for you, or an occasional thing for you, or when inspiration strikes?
Well, I've always written music since I was in high school. I always, but not necessarily great music, but and then of course, when you have to put it aside when you're trying to develop a career in performance and all that. But I do, from time to time, write things. I'll sit down at the piano and I'll get ideas, and write some of this stuff down. I did write a piece. The most recent piece was for 10 cellos and 8 basses, called Choir Boxes, and then I was encouraged to transcribe that piece for string orchestra and marimba and piano. So, and that was performed several times. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you might have some people reaching out to you about that piece. That's a cool accommodation.
Yeah.
Both the cello and bass, and then with the marimba too.
Yeah.
So hopefully this is the first of many chats. I love doing round twos with people, but I never have any questions scripted, except that one I usually ask is advice for your younger self. So if you could go back and talk to Steve, say, it could be, you pick the age, it could be Oscar Zimmerman, Steve, or some previous point, what might you tell that younger self?
I think that, it's interesting because I do look back from time to time and I feel like, well, if only I'd done this or if only I'd done that. But, the journey is the journey, and, you had to have made that mistake in order to now be where you are, or you had to have experienced such and such. I guess I don't know what
I don't know what I'd tell myself either. So I don't.
Right. I think believe in yourself is really important. Just really. And there were times when I really doubted myself. But when I didn't, then things happened for me. When I really believed in it. For instance, when I was studying in San Francisco, before getting into the symphony, I went to a San Francisco Symphony concert. It was Mahler 2, I think, and I was sitting in the balcony of the opera house listening to this, And I was just so enthralled by that music and the way they were bringing it to life. I said to myself, I'm going to get in that orchestra. So, and I did, like a few months later. So I think that if you just believe in yourself, it's really important.
It's amazing how those sometimes those moments of clarity, I guess, where you're like, I'm going to do that. And then 2 years later, 3 years later, whatever, you're like, I'm doing it.
Yeah, I had that, like that moment when I was 16 where I had to decide. But once it was clear that I was going to be a musician, then every decision I made after that helped me down that road. So, yeah.
Well, pleasure, Steve. Thank you so
Jason.
much.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
Steve, thank you so much for chatting. Folks, check out Walkabout, his latest album. We got a link in the show notes, and I can't wait to see what he's up to next. And thank you so much for listening to these podcasts. Somebody like Steve, who I've known for so many years, it's so great to sit down and dig into his career, his path, what he's working on now, lessons learned through all the different phases of his career. And I get a kick out of doing these. I learned so much in the process, and to be able to put it out to the wider world and hear from everybody out there all over the globe. Really, I get emails from people all over the globe, all continents, except I think Antarctica. Not yet. It's just so thrilling to know that these are connecting and resonating with people. And if you want to get in touch, feedback@contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me. I respond to each and every message, and I just love opening up my email and seeing those messages. It's rare that one can say that about opening up email, but it's true. I just love hearing from people out there. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. Thank you, Mitch, for everything you do for the bass world. And if you're looking for a bass, Mitch is out in the Dallas area, just east of Dallas in Texas, and you can learn more about everything he offers at mitchmooring.com. Thank you also to Krista Copper, who's going through and finding all the topics we talk about and making it possible to do highlight episodes, best of episodes, topic-related episodes. So thank you, Krista, for that. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you from San Francisco, California, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.